Star Trek Discovery Season 2 is upon us, just a couple of days away. In fact, I just realized it's coming out on the 17th, right? Doesn't that mean it's going to rock on a Thursday? That's a weird as fuck night. Whatever, I'll take it. I'm not complaining. I'm ready. I mean, I've already read the reviews for, what is it called? Brother, I think is the name of the first episode. Can't imagine what that's referencing, Mr. Spock, Michael Burnham. But yeah, I mean, everybody's saying it's great, so I can't wait. But, you know, this is not the Star Trek update, okay? This is your Patreon-only Wednesday Q&A, though maybe eventually I might have to stop saying Patreon. But this is your Patreon-only Wednesday Q&A. But yeah, I am excited as hell for that new season of Star Trek Discovery, baby. In fact, you know what? I have a passport to hell. No, really, I'm not kidding. I'm holding it in my hand right here. It says, Hell, Passport. In fact, it has a great quote on it. I love this quote. I'm probably going to use it in a user podcast or something, but it's an old Yiddish proverb. Hell shared with a sage is better than paradise with a fool. Kind of sounds like, you know, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Very similar, but I like that. A good old classic Yiddish proverb. Anyway, whew. Of course, in Judaism, they would have called it like Gehenna or something. All right, never mind. We're not going there. But bottom line, I am excited, and there's some things going on in Star Trek land that aren't, you wait for the Star Trek update. Not all of it's good, but some things about it are fucking great. So certainly better than a lot of the, well, all right, no, I'm not going to say that. Why don't we get into our questions for this week? And I actually pulled some of this from the community tab, and they were stories shared and mentioned, you know, hey, would you talk about this in a Q&A or in a Prime episode, whatever. And that's fine with me if that's how we want to shape things up. Once again, I will just say quickly, in the next couple months, we're going to be making some changes. It's going to be a very exciting time. Anyway, I can't wait to reveal all of that to you. But because I love you. The patrons, you're the best. I mean, you really are. So, all right, let's start talking this stuff up. This was an interesting story. You can find all of these. I mean, I have links in the show notes, but also you can find them on the community tab at the Sovereign Patreon page. Actually, on the community tab, great patron. She shared. She said this would be a great place for a Sovereign Tech convention. And I always joked about doing a Sovereign, or not just joked. I mean, I'd probably actually do it if the conditions are right. Of doing a Sovereign Tech convention, but like there's no way that I could like make it happen on its own, but I would make it like a sub-convention of a much larger convention, shall we say, or event. And she shared a link of the Star Trek cruise for 2020 for next year in March, the beginning of March. And yeah, that would make a hell of a place for a Sovereign Tech convention, wouldn't it? I mean, I only quote or talk about Star Trek just about every episode. I mean, why the hell not? But anyway, yeah, so I'm debating on which story to run with here first. I guess maybe, why don't we run with the tech story first? Then we can get into the science story more than anything. But this is from Motherboard, and I had the same story actually lined up. It's from January 2nd. I actually had this lined up for a Prime episode, but other things ended up taking place. So I'm happy to talk about it here and give you my thoughts on it. I mean, if that's what you want to do for the Wednesday Q&As, if you want to just share stories with me to talk about, more than happy to rock things out that way. However you want, however it shapes up, let's do it. So anyway, this is from Motherboard, and here's the headline. Tim Cook to investors. People bought fewer new iPhones because they repaired their old ones. Apple finally says that repair hurts. It's bottom line. About time. And you think that they don't put in planned obsolescence, or they didn't put in, and we talked about this over the years, how in iPhones, I know the story gets into it, about how like Apple would put in certain things where you couldn't replace the screen. If you replace the screen on an iPhone, say, it would brick the iPhone. I mean, it's such ugly shit. And of course, we also talked about how recently it looked like they were going to do that with MacBooks as well, not just iPhones. They don't, unless you are an Apple genius, which is, I dare say that's an oxymoron. But Unless you are an Apple genius, they don't want you opening up those devices. Let's read a little bit of the story here. Wednesday, Apple CEO Tim Cook wrote a letter to investors alerting them that the company would miss its revenue targets in part because Apple didn't sell as many iPhones as it expected. The lengthy letter cites specifically that people are buying fewer iPhones because they are repairing their old ones. Apple has long fought efforts that would make iPhones easier to repair. It has lobbied against right-to-repair efforts in several states, doesn't sell iPhone replacement parts, sued an independent repair professional in Norway, worked with Amazon to get iPhone and MacBook refurbishers kicked off of the Amazon marketplace, and has deals with electronics recyclers that require them to shred iPhones and MacBooks as opposed to allowing them to be refurbished. Stanley, breaking in for a second, what an environmentalist dream of a company, and how many fucking environmentalists use their shit. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, reading on. The Department of Homeland Security, meanwhile, has seized iPhone replacement parts from prominent right-to-repair activists in the United States. At the announcement event for the iPhone XS, Apple said that keeping your old iPhone is the best thing for the planet. But the fact remains that selling new iPhones is best for Apple's bottom line. That's why many people suspected that Throttlegate, in which Apple was caught slowing down iPhones with old batteries, was a ploy to sell more iPhones. The phones were slowing down to prevent them from shutting off, but Apple never disclosed this to the user. Though there's no evidence that Apple has a business model based on planned obsolescence, the company attempted to downplay the fact it was slowing down people's old phones without telling them, which had the side effect of helping the company to sell more phones. After widespread public outrage, Apple eventually offered to replace people's old iPhone batteries for $29, which would end throttling and make older phones run faster. That program ended on December 31st of 2018. Apple has never clearly articulated why it doesn't want people to fix their own iPhones or to have independent experts repair them. It has previously said that iPhones are too complex for users to repair them, even though replacing a battery is pretty easy and is done by average users all the time. But the fact that repair hurts Apple's bottom line came out in Cook's official communication with shareholders, who he is legally obligated to tell the truth to. Unlike the consumers who ultimately you thought that Apple worked for, right? No. Sorry, they are the whipping boy of the investors, as most tech giants are, and go meet some of those investors. And you tell me that they're going to do what's best for humanity. Reading on, quote, while macroeconomic challenges in some markets were a key contributor to this trend of lower iPhone sales, we believe there are other factors broadly impacting our iPhone performance, including consumers adapting to a world with fewer carrier subsidies, U.S. dollar strength-related price increases, and some customers taking advantage of significantly reduced pricing for iPhone battery replacements, end quote, Cook wrote, also citing fewer sales than expected in markets like China. That's all hogwash. Just admit it, Tim Cook. You're not innovating anymore at all. 3D Touch is not an innovation. Who gives a fuck? Okay, pretty much with 3D Touch, all you admitted is the iPhone needs more than one button. It kills me that people think, I use a Mac. I only need one button on my mouse. Try having fun with your Mac. Let's see how that works. And whoa, folks. Okay, before I read the last paragraph, please. I used to be an Apple fanboy. I really was. In fact, my favorite computer to this day, probably next to the Commodore 64, though maybe even above that, was the Mac G4 Cube. I love that fucking thing. But you better believe that I bought the baddest ass Logitech mouse at the time that I could, that had 3 buttons and a scroll wheel on it. Okay? I went all out. I made sure it had as many buttons as possible. Fuck that shit that it's only going to have one. I'm sorry, I need to get work done, or I need to play, and do some ass kicking on some video games. There's nothing more hilarious than Apple's attitude of, oh no, you only need this. You only need one home screen. You only need this, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that sometimes those aren't good things, and simplicity is generally a good thing, but with 3D Touch and all this other stuff, you're kind of admitting that simplicity isn't doing well for you. Or you're just trying to make it seem like, oh, you need this new iPhone. You need it. Let me read the last paragraph here. Right-to-repair advocates have long argued that Apple customers would be able to get a lot more out of their devices if Apple gave them the ability to repair them, but say the company doesn't want to do that because it will hurt its bottom line. Here is evidence that they might be right. Yeah, look, folks, I don't know how much more evidence you need. I don't know how many more like suppositional cases have to come out where, I mean, just realize it. You know, in fact, we were talking about this on the January, Rob Freebeard and I, we were talking about this on the January live Hangout Q&A. These companies are not consumer facing at all. They please the investors. Okay. And I mean, the investors are just draining cash. They don't care. They're just throwing in whatever the fuck they can. And they're not really thinking about the consumer. Or if they are thinking about the consumer, they're thinking the consumer is so dumb, and that means you, that you'll just fall into whatever they say. You'll fall into Apple's reality distortion field, or you'll just buy whatever, is getting schlepped off to you. All of which is insulting. And eventually, I mean, we talked about it during the episode. It was episode 307 or 308, titled "The End," where Douglas Rushkoff, kind of brought to bear the idea that, well, these tech investors know that there's some kind of collapse coming and they want to get out. Now, I've been saying, get out of the country for that matter, make all the money they can, and then get the fuck out and somehow secure that money. Now, I had been saying for years that Silicon Valley is in a bubble. Is, and it hasn't popped yet, and the only thing that kept it from popping was honestly a lot of ICO rounds that brought in some funny money, but that's just going to make matters worse once all this tries to cash in. So this is, in my opinion, part of that bubble popping. Okay, like the slowdown in iPhone sales is totally a part of that. Now, also, I mean, kudos to human beings for realizing, saying, shit, but actually my iPhone from 5 years ago, or however long, or 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, works just fine. In fact, it doesn't work any different than the new one. Oh, it doesn't have 3D touch or a notch? Well, so what? What the hell does that even really do? I mean, I'm still holding an iPhone, which means I can get laid, because if a gal saw me pull out an Android phone, she's not going to give me the time of day. No, really, there are people who think that way. I've brought it up many times, and it still bothers the fuck out of me. But I'm just saying, that's ridiculous, but you get my point. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is wonderful. Now, ironically, in the Android sphere, you have a lot of these cheaper phones that are very popular, and there's more Android devices in the world than pretty much anything else. But they genuinely don't last long, right? For varying reasons. One is software updates are a problem. The other is that the phones are just made, really, really inexpensively, really cheaply. I mean, yes, they're inexpensive, but the more important point is that, yeah, they're very cheaply made, often plastic and everything else. I mean, even though, plastic devices, we've been handling plastic devices for decades now, and a lot of them have held up fairly well. Not to say they have the same feel, as something that's all aluminum or glass or whatever the fuck the case du jour is these days. But anyway, yeah, I mean, and Apple kind of shot themselves in the foot with supporting so many generations back of the iPhone with with whatever latest version of iOS that they release. That was a major selling point against Android that I really feel they had to do, because, telling people, hey, it's more secure, and having this reputation on the entire planet, that iPhones are more secure than Android, and and they stay that way even if you had 2-3 generations back, because you're getting the latest software. I mean, that's a major selling point, and you'll get a lot of very respectable security researchers, Matthew Green, those types, who will come right out and say, oh no, the iPhone's the most secure device in the world right out of the box. Again, out of the box, not tinkering with it or doing anything with it. And yeah, I mean, the claim to fame, in my opinion, was, or that claim to that being a fact, was that you were constantly getting the latest updates, even if your phone was a few years old. Now, they can't really backpedal on that, because now Android has really wisened up, right? Because now you have Android One, which is, like Nokia phones, and I think LG might have one that's Android One. But Android One is a deal that OEMs, manufacturers of, Android phones, makes with Google, that this phone, if it's branded Android One, will get all of the latest security updates as quickly as they possibly can, and will get I guess over the next 2 years, I don't think the wording actually says that they'll get at least the next 2 versions of Android, but it says over the next 2 years they will get the latest versions of Android. That's basically in response to the claim of security that Apple was making, that, oh yeah, our devices are supported for years, blah, blah, blah. So now Apple can't backpedal on that. And people are wisening up to the fact that, no, I don't need a fucking new phone every year or every 6 months or whatever. I mean, there's still plenty of people that are dumb enough to think that they need that. But, okay, if you have the disposable income and you like to do that thing, hey, you might not be dumb. Because if you got the disposable income, I assume you have some intelligence on the matter. All right, but let's be honest, folks. I mean, okay, so right now I do have a phone from last year, from 2018, and it's the Nokia 6.1. Now, the reason I got it partly was because it is an Android One phone, and that means that I'll be getting the latest version, probably the next 2 or 3 versions of Android for it over the next couple of years. And that is very much good enough for me. I don't really care about the device itself. The device could be 5, 6, 7 years old, and it could be slow as fuck. That really doesn't mean anything to me. All I care about is those fucking security updates. I don't care about the new features that come with an operating system. I just care about the security. One of the major concerns I had, of course, was that bug or the exploit discovered over the summer of 2018, where Google couldn't patch previous versions of Android to Android 9. This bug or this exploit, which granted was difficult to actually exploit, would only affected devices older than Android 9 or that had the OS older than Android 9. So for that case, again, security is really the only selling point you can have here. And Apple can't just claim that anymore, because now Android is really getting its game into shape as far as security updates go and so on. And OEMs are getting better about it because they know that it's a selling point. Getting the latest version of the operating system, they know is a selling point. Look at, OnePlus, right? OnePlus is an Android phone company that is making their name on getting out the latest software updates and the latest software in general. You had Essential, which the Essential phone didn't necessarily do so well, but they made waves over the fact that they could release the latest version of Android on their phones pretty much the same day or the day after that Google released it to, the Pixel line or the Nexus line. Okay. So this matters to people, and it's right for them for it to matter, because security updates and software updates, that's really the best thing you can do. And now you could say, well, that these devices are inherently insecure because, like we talked about in a recent episode of Sovereign Tech, and as I've been saying over the years, smartphones as a whole are inherently insecure because it's just a block of sensors tracking everything you do. This is true, but you certainly you want as few companies and as few malicious actors, shall we say, getting their hands on that data as possible. And that's why if you have to have a smartphone, and hey, if you don't, you are living life right. Good for you. But if you don't need a smartphone, or if you do need a smartphone, you want to make sure the most important thing, it has nothing to do with any feature set with the hardware, it has nothing to do with any of that. The most important thing is that you get the latest software. There's no real reason why phones from 4 or 5 years ago generally can't get the latest versions of an operating system, including with Android. I mean, how long? What version did they get the LG Optimus 5 up to? And that phone is 8, 9 years old. But I think they had Android 7 running on that at one point. I mean, so you don't need much. But I'm glad to hear this. And I'm glad that, honestly, I'm really happy that it's hitting Apple's bottom line. Victims to some degree, of their own success. And maybe they need to switch up their business model, which is ridiculous anyway, because most of the money they make out of the mobile space is from the App Store. It's not even from the fucking hardware. Not really, and I think that they're running into, I also think that the iPhone XR, is that what you call it, right? The XR, the XR. The iPhone XR is kind of a quiet admission that, the Android strategy of, inexpensive, secure phones that last is winning, and they need to jump on that. I mean, they're still trying to sell their higher, they have to adjust their projections with this and everything. They're still trying to sell their higher end phones, the XS and whatever for over $1,000, which is just goddamn unbelievable. And maybe they do have some genuine innovations coming down the line. But yeah, this is a market maturing. That's certainly a part of this too. where, people are realizing, okay, wait, what do I actually need as far as what this device category provides? All of this is wisening up, and I just think it's great. I really, really do. I think it's wonderful. Like I said, I'm glad that the bottom line is hurting, and it's revealing so much about Apple as a company. I mean, they're blaming everything other than the fact that they're not making shitty phones. They're phones that last. Obviously, people can just get them repaired, or people just hold on to them for longer, whatever. Okay. But they are not innovating at the level that perhaps they once did. And they really, the only way they're going to get any kind of more market growth in this sense is, in my opinion, is really if they... Well, there was talk that they were going to get rid of even the Lightning port completely, and it was all just going to be charged by magnet, by whatever, like a MagLink. Great, okay, and I'm serious. Like, if they're not, if they're going to do courage, right, and they're going to get rid of the 1/8 jack. I mean, you might as well get rid of everything. Get rid of all the ports, and then you can sell it on more security. Getting rid of ports does offer effectively, more security, because then, whatever company can't do, there's all kinds of those companies out there that make devices that can get through the encryption somewhat on iPhones and other smartphones. Okay. And it connects through, whatever the Lightning port underneath, or if it's the micro USB port on Android phones, whatever. Getting rid of ports does allow you to have a significantly more secure phone. That's true. So, but that's really the only direction they can go, and that's not necessarily innovative either. And I don't know if everybody's going to buy into that. That's like a level of security to sell to people. I don't know how you're going to tell that story, but I suppose if anyone could, it could be Apple. But bottom line, if people are holding on to their computers, whatever devices, for much longer than these companies like, good. I'm so glad. Fuck with their bottom lines, because, I've said this before. We'll get into another story here, but I've said this before. There's no real, Microsoft Word still does what Microsoft Word does and has been doing for decades, right? Microsoft Windows, the entire fucking operating system, more or less, and I've said this many times over the years, just about everything you can do with, other than sandboxing and some of these like security features, and they would have been, you would have been able to bake those into, previous versions of Windows as well. Windows 95 had Internet Explorer. It had, as long as you upgraded to Windows 95 Plus, it had Internet Explorer. It had pretty much everything you can imagine. In fact, up until just a few years ago, you could still run the latest versions of Firefox on Windows 95. Most people don't need more than Windows 95. In fact, I dare say most people don't need Windows 10 at all. Not any of the new features or whatever. So I've brought this up many times. It's pure. They are putting pure bullshit on you every time they say, oh, you need this new device. Oh, you need this new, new operating or new software. As far as it pertains to security updates, yes, you most certainly do need, better security. Security can, just keep making it better every day. That's a great and wonderful thing. But a lot of the features, I have Android 9 on this. I have Pi. I love Pi. I have Android 9 on this, and it has swipe gestures, and it has that digital well-being, which, is interesting for about a day. The swipe gestures, I turn all of those off. In fact, hell, I put Nova Launcher on it in no time just to make sure that the phone does practically nothing. No one needs this shit, and no one even wants it. So, good. I'm glad that the market's finally coming out and saying, yeah, no, we're fine with our old phones. We'll keep using these. Sorry, you're not going to sell a million Galaxy S10s or, whatever letter they're going to come up with for the new. They have 3 new models of the iPhone coming out this year. The iPhone 10, whatever. I think it'd be phenomenal. Here's what they need to do. Come out with the 10XX. And that way it's the iPhone XXX. That is going to be the hottest fucking phone ever. That's what they need to do. Anyway, Tim Cook, I wish I could say I feel bad for you, but I don't. And what? You can't pay for your new UFO spaceship campus with App Store sales? How bad am I supposed to feel for you that your iPhone sales have dropped? I don't know how bad. I don't think I'm supposed to feel bad at all, because Who gives a fuck? You know? I mean, it's not like you're doing anything to, you know, forward like the future peer-to-peer economy in any real way. You're not like supporting Bitcoin or something. That could get interesting if they're trying to pull off something like, what was it, the H1 or whatever from HTC, the blockchain phone, or the one from, what was it, the Finney, right? Cirrus Labs or Siren Labs or whatever. It's not like you're trying to do anything interesting like that, even though those are kind of BS. But regardless, hey, you know, if you want to do something interesting, finally fucking do something interesting. Otherwise, I don't give a shit. You know, like I don't know. You're not blowing smoke. You're not blowing smoke. You're not blowing up my skirt in any way. So I don't see why I should be like, oh man, you know, but they tried so hard. They should be making more money. Oh yeah. Give me a fucking break. Anyway, speaking of fucking, how about this story from PopSci from Popular Science? Early humans hooked up with other species a whole bunch. It's probably time to stop acting surprised. This is from November 28th, 2018. And basically the story is talking about something that I can remember, 6 years ago. Very, very early episode of Sovereign Tech. That I think was actually titled You Fucked a Neanderthal. Now, it's pronounced Neanderthal, not Neanderthal. Okay, if you say Neanderthal, you're probably a Neanderthal. Well, okay. So I'm going to you're probably going to hear a ton of jokes about Neanderthals being stupid. I want to get that out of the way too, as much as there is evidence that this story is bringing up that actually looks like, you know, Homo sapiens and, you know, Neanderthals and other species of humans were kind of fucking right and left, you know, interspecies stooping. Neanderthals, you know, there's evidence for that. There's also significant evidence that Neanderthals actually weren't dumb at all. Maybe not that they were smarter than you or I, but they weren't dumb. In fact, I can remember in one of my favorite sci-fi book series, that being William Shatner's Quest for Tomorrow. Seriously, if you haven't read them, there's like 5 books in the series. They're fucking amazing. I mean, they're really, really amazing. In fact, the last 2 books in the series, I could find the first 3 books in the series on ebook, not on Amazon. They're not available officially. But the last 2 books in the series, I actually ordered, and I got those professionally scanned. So I might have released those. If I haven't, I'll get them released. But I love the Quest for Tomorrow series. Loved it so much that I made sure it was, preserved for posterity. Laws be damned. But in that, you find out that Neanderthals were actually a telepathic species, or I mean, of course, it's science fiction. It's not real. But the idea was that they were a telepathic species, that aliens came to Earth and like transplanted them away and killed off the Neanderthals on Earth. And, you know, that way they couldn't replicate the experiment that the aliens engaged in, where they were seeing, you know, what it would be like for a telepathic species to evolve slowly and so on and intersperse it into their own genes. And like these Neanderthals on this other planet that was Jim Endicott, the hero in Quest for Tomorrow series, he finds out that they became like they became an industrial species eventually, but it took them longer than it did humans, not because they were dumb, but because since they were telepathic, they never invented writing. There was no reason to invent writing since they were telepathic. And so it led to, you know, Neanderthals not becoming an industrial civilization quick enough, or as quick as humans did. But then also what ends up happening is because they are telepathic and whatever, they eventually like all kind of come together, transcend their physical bodies and become like a godlike being. It's pretty amazing. So, you know, again, to say that they were stupid, science fiction is, there's other books like from the 90s. There's that one where they find like the last tribe of Neanderthals in Afghanistan. I'm trying to remember the book might have just been called Neanderthal, and it's all about how in that book as well they were a telepathic species, which is an interesting. I mean, you know, one of the concepts of, I think, where people run with that, the idea that Neanderthals were actually telepathic, is that they didn't seem to really be able to talk. Like if they talked, and I think I've ran with these stories in the earlier years of Sovereign Tech as well. Their vocal cords were, you know, very, very condensed to where if they did say anything, they probably sounded like birds. And so, some people want to say, well, how did they communicate then? I mean, and obviously they kind of thrived. And according to this new research from this story from Popular Science, I mean, they didn't just thrive. I mean, they interbred. Like, obviously, they were considered somehow some kind of equals. Who knows? But, if they couldn't really talk to each other, what exactly did they do? How did this happen? And I think that's where kind of the first theories or speculations, particularly in fiction, that Neanderthals were actually telepathic sort of came from. It's an interesting idea. I mean, I've said for a very long time that I wish that humanity could evolve telepathy, because then we could get past all the bullshit and we could really know what's going on. I mean, talk about a very quick and easy way to change the world. But anyway, that would get down. I'd start waxing pretty poetic down that. So we won't go there. But, admittedly, I mean, okay, humans aren't telepathic. Now, okay, so, and one of the points that the story brings up is how everybody kind of has Neanderthal DNA, which sort of points at the fact that various species of Homo, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago were stooping each other right and left. I suppose if one wanted to keep running with the fanciful notion that Neanderthals were actually telepathic, again, the story isn't saying that. That's, like I said, the speculation and part of fiction in general. I don't know many people that are making like an actual case for the idea that Neanderthals are telepathic, in academia, shall we say. But I suppose if one wanted to get saucy, this is where they could start saying, well, this is where ESP comes from, extrasensory perception and so on, which that, understand that ESP, things like that, at one point, even just like maybe 50 years ago, was considered very serious science. I mean, that was being studied and, again, was taken terribly seriously. ESP is, I mean, there's a reason that term is so popular, because it was being so well studied. It wasn't like just some kind of, religious quackery or, even pseudo. I mean, you could argue now that it's pseudoscience if you want, but at the time they were taking it very seriously, and it was very much getting studied, and it would continue to get studied right up, even the U.S. Army would be studying it, right? With, was Operation Stargate, right? Men Who Stare at Goats, that sort of thing. And, maybe there were people who had a higher level of Neanderthal DNA, and so they still had these psychic powers that the Neanderthals originally had. Maybe that's the thing. Now, again, that is just speculation run roughshod. Okay, I am not saying that anybody's claiming this, nor is the Popular Science story, and we're going to get to that in a second. But, to some degree, I think that humans have learned or do have ways, innate, evolved ways, of communicating without words. I mean, our ability to communicate so much with touch. And that's why, I don't know if or when the, human species could ever even develop something like telepathy, like evolve it, or, even create technologies that would allow for it in some way. But that's kind of terrifying, because who's controlling those technologies? Facebook? Fuck you. But regardless, I've said often that the two biggest problems in the world is that there's not enough touch between humans, and maybe just touch in general with all kinds of things. Everybody's so into sterility, or everything being sterile, and no, don't touch that, it's dirty. There's not enough touch, and most people don't say what they really feel. They won't. They couch it all the time. And, I think the touch part, maybe that's something we learned from the Neanderthals is, the importance of touch and what could be communicated without words if Neanderthals couldn't talk. I mean, maybe that's how maybe they weren't telepathic. Maybe they just communicated so much with touch, and we picked that up from them. And if so, what a beautiful thing, because I know, when a certain person touches me, I mean, what gets communicated, and it's fucking beautiful. I mean, it's better than any words. So, anyway, I'm just going crazy with some little theories here and there. That is not... I mean, it's kind of relevant to the story because they don't really get into it. But, if these... Basically, what they're laying out here is that, again, different hominids were fucking each other. Okay? Denisovans were fucking Neanderthals. Neanderthals were fucking Homo sapiens. Blah, blah, whatever. Okay? Everybody's fucking everybody. Obviously, there weren't shared languages there, or most likely, and as best we know about Neanderthals, they could barely even speak, or at least they couldn't speak the way that Homo sapiens say, or our more direct ancestors, genetically direct ancestors, would have spoken. So how exactly did they know they wanted to get busy? Well, obviously, body language and touch. So it's kind of relevant in that sense. But let me read a little bit of the story here. The story of how modern humans came to be is still complicated and murky, but there's one thing that's become very clear over the last decade of research. Humans loved to get down, even with other species. That's why nearly everyone whose ancestors migrated out of Africa possesses at least some lingering bits of Neanderthal DNA. As it turns out, those experiences in interspecies mating were far from isolated one-night stands. According to a new analysis of gene ancestry data published in Monday in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, populations of humans and Neanderthals mated and procreated multiple times during the 30,000 years when the two species overlapped. Our snippets of Neanderthal DNA are not the result of one-off hookups. Quote, the history of human-Neanderthal interactions is complex, end quote, says Joshua Schreiber, a genomics researcher at Temple University and a co-author of the new study. Quote, it wasn't just one time that humans and Neanderthals ran into each other and interbred. They overlapped for tens of thousands of years and multiple interactions occurred, end quote. Scientists first uncovered evidence that humans and Neanderthals had once interbred earlier this decade, thanks to new strides made in the genetic analysis of present-day human populations from around the world. But the low resolution of this data suggested humans had only interbred with Neanderthals in Western Asia once before, splitting up and migrating throughout Eurasia. More recent research indicates that modern-day humans living in East Asia typically possess about 10 to 20% more Neanderthal ancestry in their genes, which is way higher than the average 2% Neanderthal typical in non-African humans. One hypothesis was that some populations more quickly purged out their Neanderthal DNA through negative selection because the associated traits didn't suit their ways of life. Another more complex theory suggested that one older European population, Basal Eurasians, avoided breeding with other species of Homo, and that when this group met with other humans in the continent, they watered down the Neanderthal genes. But none of these explanations really held up. Schreiber, in collaboration with others, started developing a theory that hinged on a new method of identifying Neanderthal fragments in modern human DNA, and his lab began honing in on better specifying how Neanderthal DNA fragments were distributed through different European and East Asian populations. Ultimately, through a combination of pen and paper mathematics and computer simulations that could better analyze data from the 1000 Genomes Project, Schreiber and his team found the evidence supported a model with multiple genetic mixtures of Neanderthal and human DNA in both Europe and East Asia. So if Neanderthals and humans bred frequently over such a long time, why does the former's DNA comprise such a small portion of the modern-day human genome? Schreiber thinks that among many potential factors, negative selection definitely played a role in diluting Neanderthal genes over many generations. Unfortunately, the fractured array of current data we have makes it much more difficult to piece together a clear history just yet. Schreiber is pretty open about the limitations of his own findings and even cautions against outright buying into the new paper's model. There's significant room for error in accurately identifying DNA bases. And he says mating between the two species must have involved very closely related Neanderthals. When looking at fragments from another early human group, the Denisovans, Neanderthals weren't our only special friends, researchers can clearly identify that the DNA came from different distinct populations on different occasions. Quote, however, the fragments we see from Neanderthals are consistent with coming from a single Neanderthal population. This perhaps isn't too surprising because Neanderthals had very low genetic diversity, but it is definitely worth following up on, end quote, says Schreiber. So anyway, the bottom line being is that they're finding, like there is a lot, this interbreeding went on for a very long time, and that it happened through varied populations. And, there's a lot of different theories. We're not exactly sure, again, as far as why, if it was so commonplace, why is the Neanderthal DNA, plays up such an insignificant percentage in modern human DNA? They don't really have all of the best answers for this, right? And they're still kind of figuring, all of that out, and there's a lot of room for error here. I mean, seeing negative traits or something like that, or the idea that the Neanderthals that they did stoop, say in Europe or East Asia or wherever, were, shall we say, maybe those Neanderthals were already heavily diluted for whatever reason. And so they're more closely related to the, say the humans in the area. Sure. I mean, that's certainly possible as well. But, I'm the last person who could have an opinion as to why, again, Neanderthal DNA fragments are such a small percentage in modern humans. Really, I'll leave it to these people. But as far as why did, why did our ancestors stoop other types of Homo sapiens or other types of hominids and so on? Oh, I can definitely talk about that because certainly I am a sexual creature, and well, and this is partly why, personally, I don't really dig the whole idea that they have some kind of negative traits other than maybe that they couldn't talk. Like maybe that's the negative trait so much. Not to say that they're dumb or, oh, no, their brow's too big or something like that. I mean, that just gets into like racist nonsense in my opinion. Okay. And, the word racist actually does have meaning. I know everybody wants to just throw it away these days, but no, it does. But really, I mean, why were we stooping or, why were, ancient humans stooping Neanderthals and Denisovans and so on? Very simple. Sex is not just about procreation, right? And I think humans, innately know that. I think just that culture and religion and other things have tried to tell them the opposite, that, oh, no, sex is just for procreation. Do not engage in this act for fun. You are not to have fun, you plebe. You are meant to serve the priest, or you are meant to serve the president, or you're meant to serve, even though the president can go and grab whatever pussies he wants, but you are not to do that. Damn it. You are not righteous. And if you want to be righteous, stop having sex unless it's for procreation to create more good little godly people. Anyway, humans innately know that sex is a major part, it's a social aspect of who we are. It is a social trait as much as it is a, procreative trait, if you want to call it that, or a trait for genetic determinism, whatever. Okay. And so, if Neanderthals have similar body parts, right? And look close enough, again, we're not talking about bonobos here. I mean, Neanderthals, we do have an idea of what they look like. They're pretty human. Okay. In fact, I don't know, maybe some of the smaller human gals liked the big Neanderthal guy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, if they seem fairly closely related, and obviously they were adaptable to where, so many people have Neanderthal DNA, if they can engage in the social action, the social lubricant, shall we say, of getting it on, of stooping, of fucking, well, of course they're going to do it. I mean, because, again, instinctually, it is an aspect of, especially when maybe you're more healthy about it, and if you're outside of consumerist culture, maybe you can be a little more healthy about sex, or know that love is more important than money, things like this. You will engage in this more on the regular. And again, these aren't one night stands. It's not like that they were trysts. These were very much, as this paper was saying, these were very much long-term relationships, according to this paper, and it was going on for a very, very long time. So the concept here, or what I think, the takeaway from this is that, look, we are very much a sexual species. This is what we do. It's how we maybe communicate with each other. In fact, it's how we can communicate without words, or if we don't have a shared language, we can still be turned on and want to get our freak on, and get sexy. Wonderful. Dynamite. Now, something else that the paper does get into that I think is interesting to point out is the lack of genetic diversity within Neanderthals, and that's part of what led to eventually their downfall. I find it ironic that racists, because those are actual people, okay, we could name names if we need to, even within the libertarian community, shall we say, but racists, not all libertarians are racist. I'm not saying that even remotely. Okay. I'm just, people that know, what I'm talking about. But those folks that just want, oh, we need to preserve the white race. Oh, white people we gotta stick together, and oh, white people are superior, blah, blah, blah. I mean, your fate is the fate of the Neanderthals. You're going to lose that genetic diversity that's eventually just going to wipe you out. Way to go. How brilliant of you. Gee, your Western civilization is doing a damn fine job. It's completely missing the point of how a species survives, especially when you consider, and what adds more to this is what's called the Red Queen hypothesis. The article doesn't talk about this at all, but the Red Queen hypothesis or the Red Queen theory, I know those are kind of two separate things, but you get it, is the idea that sex evolved ultimately as an arms race, where what survived, okay, throughout millions of years are species that effectively through their breeding process, okay, through their sexual procreation, that it was a process that could combat various bacteria, viruses, and whatever else is out there just trying to wipe out life, okay, instead of protect it. And that's the idea with the Red Queen theory, is that, okay, if you, through your process of fucking, whatever that is for whatever species, and in fact that's why fucking evolved to be between at least key term, at least two genders. Though there certainly are, arguments and capabilities for maybe only one gender to procreate. But that anyway, that's getting into a whole other conversation. But the reason that genders would evolve is so that they could win at this arms race. And, against whatever, various microbes are trying to wipe out every species on Earth at any given moment, something along those lines. Okay, again, I'm not exactly the best person to talk about this, but bottom line being, that's the concept, there. And genetic diversity is what allows for that arms race to get won, by whatever species. In this case, various types of hominids. In this case, our ancient humans and maybe Neanderthals. I mean, that very act alone, that interbreeding, could be what allowed humanity to even survive. Tough thing to consider, but or not. I don't think it's tough. I think it's damned fine. Just like if we found, if Vulcans came down today, what, you're going to tell me I can't stoop, to Paul? Are you, or Valeris? Are you kidding? Why not? So, yeah. Anyway, go watch Terra Nova on Enterprise. What a damn fine little double episode that was. Okay, so anyway, getting way out in the weeds here. This is interesting, and yeah, it's just, look, I'm not going to say that it's a part of every human's nature, but a major part for much of the human species. Sex is a big deal. Okay. And it's something that, again, it's a social interaction. Even if they were concerned about negative traits, why would that stop them? If it's just a social interaction, which, again, I would argue that humans would innately recognize before they were told by whatever culture that, oh, no, sex is not for fun. They would just do it for fun, and they do it with whoever happened to be around, whether it's Denisovans, Neanderthals, you go down the list. So I think that this is interesting. You could read the paper more if you want. I think it just, it's just more bolstering of the idea that, when there were multiple types of humans on planet Earth, or multiple types of, species Homo, that, yeah, I mean, they were all kind of rocking each other. And hey, dare I say that's almost downright sexy. I have no problem with that at all. In fact, I think going forward into the future, I've argued this many times. In fact, maybe right now, for that matter, that there are technically, and I'm not talking about white people, Asian people, whatever. I'm not talking about those kind of races. Like literally different races of Homo sapiens, like of different beings. And again, I'm not talking about skin color. I'm talking about where there are very different traits. I mean, I'm not saying it's the X-Men and it's like mutants or something. But sure, I don't see any reason why there isn't other types of Homo out there right now. And in no way is that saying one's better than the other. But I've talked about this. I've kind of fancied on this. I think I remember in a Sovereign Tech newsletter, the concept of Homo empathicus, because there are some of us where Certain things we engage with, interact, and it affects us wholly differently than the rest of humanity, than the rest of the human species. And one has to wonder, is there a biological difference enough? Because, here's an important thing to understand. In general, of all ironies to say that phrase, in general, medical science plays off of the average. Okay. I know about this personally. All right. Because here's the thing. So, most medical advice, medical textbooks and everything, they all tell you what? That the human body, the average temperature, internal temperature of the human body is 98.6, 0.7 degrees, something like that. And I was there. I was in the hospital. I told this story, I think, recently on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode. I was in the hospital. They wouldn't believe that my average temperature, the average for me, was 94.6 degrees Fahrenheit. They would not believe it. Okay. And they did all kinds of thermometer shit to me to prove the point. And finally they accepted it. Okay. But that's the rub, is that even the doctors themselves, they just would not accept. No, there's no way that there's somebody who has that, has such a low body temperature at all times. Now, I've had other people who are a little more, genuine scientists who are far more open, to these facts. And they say, well, that's probably why you barely ever get sick, Brian, is because, the bacteria can't really thrive in you. And so on. That, it's just, you're not a breeding ground for what would get other people sick. And so to say that there are people, where medical science, again, ignores kind of the outstanding, right? They ignore the above average or, well, sometimes below average. In fact, they don't just ignore it. Often they do terrible things to it, which is really sad. But you get my point, is that a lot of medical science is wholly based around the average, as to where if there was more attention paid to the special cases out there, we might find out that actually today, just as it was thousands and thousands of years ago, that there are multiple types of humans now. Just like back then there were, you had basically your Homo sapiens, and you had, Denisovans, and you had Neanderthal, and so on. I don't see any reason why that couldn't still be the case. In fact, well, I'm not going to get conspiratorial about it. But anyway, there you have it. No, there are no lizard Jews. Trust me. Granted, I'm a Jew, so I suppose I would say that. Oh, well, anyway. So there you go. Interesting story. Humans get busy. They get their freak on. And, close enough is close enough. I don't know. I don't think they had I don't think they had beer goggles back then or anything for the Neanderthals. But it's an interesting story. So there we go. Anyway, let's get into our album of the week. And this is way kind of out of left field here. So I am a fan. I think I mentioned them recently. I did that You Need Metal supplemental podcast a few months ago, where I think I talked about the new release by the band TNT, which is a classic band from the 80s. I love TNT. Anyway, so Tony Harnell, who was in TNT, he started a side project, a side band, back in 2005. And he had Magnus Carlsen, I think, as a guitarist, got a drummer and everything. And it was called Starbreaker, and that was the name of their first album. And it was a really, really, kind of a intense, epic, kind of power metal, but it had a little more intensity, a little darkness to it that I really enjoyed. I don't mean darkness like Powerwolf, but it had a darkness to it. And they came out with another album a few years later called Love's Dying Wish, which was, I really like that one especially. But they have a new album coming out. Of course, I have an advanced copy here. I'm not going to say how I got that, but don't worry, you could get it too. But anyway, it's called Dysphoria by Starbreaker, and I don't know the exact date that this is supposed to come out, probably sometime in February, but you can find it now. And oh man, is it? That's just some great hard rock. There opens right up with a great opening track titled Pure Evil. Hey, how can you go wrong? Wild Butterflies, Last December, How Many More Goodbyes, beautiful one. Then the title track, Dysphoria. Beautiful one is actually, that's a very nice ballad. I haven't heard a great ballad in a while, but that one does all right. It's not Scorpions, but it's not bad. So anyway, I really like this. Just a good hard rocker with a little bit of a dark edge to it. It's not too extreme. If you want to differentiate, if you're the type that differentiates between hard rock and metal, I generally don't. But if you're that type, this is more of a hard rock album, Again, it's by one of the guys from TNT. Then it is a metal album, but it's hard rock that has this weird, or not weird, but it has this rare, shall I say, not unique, but rare edge of darkness to it that I really enjoy. And again, it's rare. You don't get it often. In fact, the only album I can think of that maybe, and I'm not saying that these are even remotely close to each other as far as greatness levels go, but like Kiss's, 1993's or 92's Revenge, the Revenge album, which is between that and Asylum, I think either one could claim to be the best Kiss record ever. And in Revenge, you had that same thing where it wasn't exactly metal, but it was very much a hard rock album that just had this really dark edge to it, like with the opening track, Unholy, which is kind of fitting since Dysphoria opens up with, or Starbreaker's Dysphoria opens up with Pure Evil, and then it has Take It Off and all that. It just had it had this darker edge that I thought was so great. It's one of the reasons that Kiss's Revenge it's still such a solid album today, in my opinion, because there's a few things quite like it. And I think Starbreaker Dysphoria is an attempt in that direction. Do check out, if you end up liking Dysphoria, do check out Starbreaker's previous two albums. That includes Love's Dying Wish and Starbreaker itself. You won't be disappointed. If you're into this kind of music, trust me, you won't be disappointed. So anyway, okay, I will wrap that up, or we'll wrap this one up with that. A couple of fun stories to get into. That was great. Of course, lots of content still to come out. We got a user podcast to come out this month, and I mean, all Sovereign Insights, plenty, Star Trek update, Star Wars update, and the Star Trek update, like I said, this month is probably going to be 2 hours long. I mean, there's just so much fucking shit to talk about. And the Star Wars update will often go, just as long. Lots more Q&As, lots of great content to come out throughout January. So we'll wrap this baby up. I will see all of you, on the other side.